Coming up on this episode of Nintendo Cartridge Society, the reason they call it ABCs is because there are 4 C buttons on the Nintendo 64 controller. It's dangerous to go alone, so the Nintendo Cartridge Society goes with you. Welcome to Nintendo Cartridge Society. My name is Patrick Ellers, and I am joined, as I am always joined, by my co-host, Mark Mitchell. Mark, how's it going?
It's going great. The new season of the Great British Bake Off is starting on Netflix now. Have you been watching it, Patrick?
Yes, I have.
So I
was there for Cake Week. I was there for Biscuit Week. I was there for Bread Week. Am I going to be there for Mexican Week? From the previews, I think it's going to be regrettable, but I'm going to be there. But also, I don't think, look, they know how to bake a lot of strange, like, European things, right? But I think there are just some kinds of foods that, like, the British bakers can't wrap their head around. They did pizzas last week, and I was like, all these pizzas are terrible. Why are you doing this? Have you been keeping up?
My husband and I just started it.
Okay.
So we just saw Cake Week.
You just saw Cake Week,
and I have to say, that show look. I cry at everything. Okay. But that show can play me like a fiddle.
Yeah.
Like, so many times my husband looked over at me and incredulously was like, "Are you teary-eyed?" I'm getting teary-eyed when they're doing good. I'm getting teary-eyed when they're doing bad. I like this cast. What can I say?
It's a good cast. I mean, it's a solid formula. I don't much care for the hosts at the moment. I like the old hosts. And I don't know, man, the opening bit that they do at the beginning of each season now, which has just gotten like more elaborate and like crazier. It topped out with Achy Breaky Heart, I think, last year. Do you remember this?
I vaguely remember it.
And it was Star Wars this time, right?
This year was Star Wars, yes.
I don't need any of that.
I don't need it either.
I just don't need it. Like, I'm not going to the Great British Baking Show for comedy.
I did laugh, spoilers for the Great British Baking Show, when the little like R2D2 type robot rolled in.
Yeah.
And they like lifted off the lid and had cake underneath.
Yeah.
I like that. That got me.
That is pretty good. What's better than an R2D2? An R2D2 with cake inside him. You know what's better than an R2D2 with cake inside him? The Sonic Forces borrowing program. How would you like to participate in it? All you got to do is send us an email with a mailing address so we can send you my copy of Sonic Forces. You send that to Nintendo Cartridge Society at gmail.com. And you then have a chance to borrow my copy of Sonic Forces for the Nintendo Switch. There may be a box that arrives at your house. It says Sonic Forces on the outside. On the inside, though, it says Untitled Goose Game, baby. And that's just part of the program. Either way, you play it as long as you want. You send it back. It's a perfect borrowing program, and it costs you nothing.
I know that it is the perfect borrowing program, and
yes.
I'm not doubting that for a second. I am wondering, though, do you think that for some people who get Untitled Goose Game, they, like rip open it's like Christmas morning.
Right.
They rip open the envelope and they're like, it's here, Sonic Forces. And then they open it up.
So I don't want to tip our hands. I don't know if either of us have the Nintendo 64 kid on our ABCs of Nintendo 64, but there's like that video of the kid on Christmas morning opening that Nintendo 64 and freaking out. What if he opened that box and it was just Untitled Goose Game?
No, it was a Nintendo 64 box
right.
with Untitled Goose Game inside.
That's right. It would be pretty disappointing.
It would be, especially because you wouldn't have any way to play it.
Yeah, not for like 20 years. Yeah, it's true.
Well, here's something that would not at all be disappointing.
Mm-mm.
You can leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere that you get your podcast. 2 things about this. 1, Patrick and I appreciate it so much when you do. It helps people find the show. Patrick and I really like reading your reviews. And then the second thing is that if you leave us a 5-star review on the US Apple Podcast Store, we will see it and we will give you a shout out. But if you leave us a review anywhere else, or you favorite us, or you share the show in some other way, we appreciate it no less. We just can't see it. So we would love for you to send us an email, hit us up on Twitter, let us know that you have done so we can give you a shout out on the show. And I know some of you may be a little worried that it's like tooting your own horn. but it's not. You're not giving yourselves a shout out.
No.
We're giving you the shout out.
We're giving you the shout out. You're giving us, it's transactional. You're giving us the good review. Please let it be a good review. And then we give you a shout out on the show. It's you've earned it at that point.
Exactly.
Just as we have earned the good review.
Debatable.
You can also get in our Discord, which is a great place where people are talking about Splatoon. They're talking about Ring Fit Adventure. They're talking about everything new that's going on in Nintendo. Look, Mark, we are, by when this episode comes out, we are just a couple hours away from that Mario movie teaser trailer / Nintendo Direct all happening at one time. You had better believe that there is going to be some insightful, maybe kind of snarky, but also pretty positive conversation about it in our Discord. So get in there if you're not already. Send us an email, hit us up on Twitter, let us know you'd like an invite, and we will send you one so you can join in on the fun. Mark, I'm realizing now as I'm queuing up the next music cue that I haven't had to produce this show live in a while because we've been recording remotely for the last week and a half. So I guess it's nice to see. I'm just realizing now that I haven't seen you in person in 2 weeks.
Oh yeah, that's right. Well, I'm praying for this music cue.
Well, good, because here it comes.
And to our delight and some people's chagrin, it went off without a hitch.
It was the correct music cue and everything. Mark, it is the 26th anniversary of the Nintendo 64, which came out, of course, September 28th.
I think 30th.
Okay, September 30th. We know it's September for sure. 1996. And so we thought it was as good a time as any to go over the Nintendo 64 and do a real dig into to the ephemera around it. So we're doing an ABCs of Nintendo 64.
What did you say?
I said 28th.
I said 30th. It was the 29th.
Ooh, what?
We got there in the end.
We got so close. Well, I think it is also the Nintendo 64 is also incredibly relevant right now, just because we've got all of this news around games coming to the Nintendo Switch Online Plus Expansion Pass, including one of the most legendary games on the platform, one that seemed like it was going to be orphaned there forever. GoldenEye 007.
Right, and for me, because I know that games were available on the Wii Virtual Console, and I'm assuming Nintendo 64 games were also available on the Wii U Virtual Console, but I didn't own a Wii U, and it's been a long time since I've had a Wii, and so there's been this stretch where there are Nintendo 64 games as they're coming out on Nintendo Switch Online. It's I'm rediscovering them, playing them again for the first time. It's been a lot of fun. I'm appreciating some of those games more than I have in the past. They don't all age well, but it's still fun to explore the Nintendo 64 library.
They don't all age well, and I think that's also part of what makes it so. When Nintendo 64 games were appearing on the Wii, right, and you could buy them on the Virtual Console, that there's a little bit of sticker shock associated there, where you're because it was it $10 or $15 or something like that, where you're oh, do I really want to spend that to play Excite Bike 64, or Wave Race again? It's no, I can wait. Spending $8 on Link's A Link to the Past, that feels fine for whatever reason for me. But the Nintendo 64 games, yeah, it's just the price point is too high, and my nostalgia at that point was too soft.
Also, because it wasn't that long ago, which is crazy to say,
yeah.
but it's basically 10 years since the launch of the Nintendo 64, and even less than that for the end of that console's life.
Home,
yeah, exactly. So it wasn't that long, but one of the things that makes the Nintendo 64 kind of unique in Nintendo's library, and the GameCube is this way as well, is we've been able to play the NES classics in so many different ways on so many different systems for so long. Same with Super Nintendo games. Those were available in various forms, in handhelds and stuff. But Nintendo 64 games, you got the occasional, Mario 64 DS. But for the most part, Nintendo 64 games lived on the Nintendo 64.
And they died on the Nintendo 64.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I guess you are right. The Ocarina of Time 3D remake and Majora's Mask and Star Fox 64.
But it's just
kind of just the great. It's the very cream of the crop that gets sort of reintegrated into like newer game libraries, but anything that's like below that absolute top tier is just sort of buried.
Yeah, like there just hasn't been a lot of official ways to play the Nintendo 64 library, and so it's kind of fun for it to have this little renaissance.
So we're doing the ABCs of the Nintendo 64, and Mark, I don't know how you approach this. I usually, when we do an ABCs, I try to be esoteric and specific. But I found this one a little challenging just because the library is small enough, and it's also like far enough in my past that it feels like a distant memory, but it's also not so far in my past that it's like part of my childhood necessarily. I mean, I 96, so I was 14 when the Nintendo 64 came out. I bought it with my own money. It's the first console that I did that with. Second after Virtual Boy. And so, I was already like on that journey to like being a little grown up, right? So
And also, I'm not.
yeah.
I guess this is more of a question for you because at the same time, you were following the Final Fantasy franchise to like PlayStation, and so you had.
Yeah.
Did you have that like competing console kind of for like the first time because you weren't?
Yeah, well, I mean, so I bought the Nintendo 64 because I thought Final Fantasy VII was going to come out on it, right? Like Final Fantasy VII was featured in an issue of Nintendo Power, before it came out on PlayStation. And so I thought, yes, like I was like, I'm getting the new I'm getting the new Nintendo thing so I can play Final Fantasy on it. And then as soon as it was like Final Fantasy VII coming only to PlayStation, that's when I was like, okay, then I need a PlayStation. Like I followed it there for that game, and obviously played a bunch of other games on it, and made like lifelong relationships with other series like Resident Evil, for example. But yeah, it's that was one of the huge disappointments to me, of the Nintendo 64, was I bought it for something that I was sure was going to be on there and then wasn't.
Yeah, that is crazy.
Mark, what drove you to the Nintendo 64? When did you get one?
Growing up, we were, I guess actually my entire life now, we were like a Nintendo family. So, got the NES, got the Super Nintendo, and got the Nintendo 64. All of these, and like the GameCube and Wii and all this stuff, we got late.
Yeah.
We were never like early adopters. And so I remember getting
like later in the day when it came out, or
yeah, usually like a couple of years.
Yeah.
At least when they started bundling games or drop in price, like that sort of thing. And I remember the game that we got with our Nintendo 64 was Mario Kart 64. That was the first game.
Yeah.
And I have quite a few siblings, and so having like 4-player like split screen was huge. This was like such a gigantic shift in video games.
I think we are starting to tread on what I believe some of our talking points
okay,
will be
as
we get further into the ABCs.
You're right.
So I hate to derail you in the middle of the story.
No, you're right. You're completely
let's
right.
Just in the slightest of ways adhere to our own format.
Well, do you want to go first?
Yeah. So, Mark, I want. We're starting with A.
Uh-huh.
The letter of the alphabet A. I'll go first. And I feel like when we did the ABCs of GameCube, I started with analog triggers. And I'm going to start with analog thumbstick for the Nintendo 64. This is a feature of the Nintendo 64 controller that, while not being the first analog stick on a console controller, is the first thumbstick that is like standard. This is a thing that was not on controllers, and it is on all controllers now. And it changed the way you interacted with the thing. And it also just like, because it is right in the middle of the controller and it is shaped so bizarrely, there's just no avoiding it when you look at the controller, right? And it just changed your entire relationship with it. It made 3D movement possible. It was just a revolutionary little piece of hardware.
Yeah, it is crazy looking back on it now you go from an NES controller and a Super Nintendo controller, which are very approachable, and it is very clear
Yes.
how you are supposed to use it. The Nintendo
and how one comes from the other.
Yes.
Yeah.
The Nintendo 64 controller truly
Baffling.
feels like, baffling. You look at it and it's not immediately clear, how am I supposed to hold it? How am I going to control a game with it? And because, you don't it's strange.
Well, hold on. I saw you making funny shapes with your hands.
I was trying to
How do you hold the Nintendo 64 controller?
I'm trying to even this feels like trying to spell tree after you've thought about tree for too long.
Hold on,
is tree a real word?
I'm gonna go grab one and then you're gonna hold it.
Okay, because I think anyways, basically the Nintendo 64 controller, it really is like a first draft. It's like, okay, we are taking our best shot at putting this kind of like control thumbstick
right
on a controller, and
it's just in the middle.
It's very strange.
It's just in the middle of the controller. You can put your microphone down if you need to hold it.
I think basically you're holding it, and you're having your thumb on one D-pad, and then
what
your other.
No, give it to me. Give it.
Okay,
to me.
how do you hold it?
I'd say for 90% of gaming, I hold it like this.
Oh, interesting.
This is with my left hand on the center prong of the trident. So that my index finger is resting on the Z. Usually if I'm gonna push the D-pad at all, I let my thumb drift.
Yeah,
over there
that makes sense
to push it.
I love that you call it the center prong of the trident.
What do you call it?
Wrong. You're not wrong. It's just such a funny image.
Yeah.
Somebody holding, King Triton holding up the Nintendo 64 controller.
Yeah, on the edge of a pole or something.
Uh-huh.
Just what a weird little analog stick, and notoriously sensitive or
would break.
Yes.
Yeah, it would wear down almost, and
Yeah.
I remember the control stick becoming loose.
Yes.
Almost, and so you had to either at that point you replaced it, or you ended up having to really jam it to the side in order to get to do what you wanted
and hold it back to the neutral position as well.
Right,
you have
because
to,
it
hold
just
it in
flop
place.
over.
It makes me wonder if because we are testing our Nintendo 64 controller grips by using the controller for the Switch that is also the Nintendo 64 controller, and it makes me wonder if the build on this is somehow stronger, so that
I wonder as well.
The analog stick will last longer.
Yeah, I guess we'll find out when Mario Party releases.
We will, and at the risk of treading on things we may talk about later, we will talk no more about Mario Party at the specific juncture.
We are going to come back to this analog stick, though.
Okay, great.
Okay, so my A is for Arwing, the main ship, the iconic ship from Star Fox series, and specifically Star Fox 64 from 1997, which is truly, I think, become the platonic ideal of a Star Fox game.
Yes.
It hit gamers really hard, and we have forever been chasing the impossible high of Star Fox 64 since then.
Yeah, there has not been a Star Fox game that has created the sort of arcadey action with the multiple paths through levels, and it's just been so clean and neat. You can get through a full playthrough of Star Fox 64 in about an hour, if you know what you're doing. But that doesn't really diminish. You can just play it again and do a completely different path, have an almost totally different experience. And also it's got really funny voice acting from all these characters, the introduction of Star Wolf, all this stuff. It's just it's just a great little game.
I have not played the 3D remake. Did you play it?
I have not played the 3D
3DS?
remake.
Yeah, I think it would be interesting to go back to. Also, when
if we want to pick that up from the eShop, we got to do it.
We got to do it now.
We are running out of time, Mark.
When I was doing this for the ABCs, obviously Arwing starts with an A. But do you think so much of Star Fox is a riff on Star Wars and Indiana Jones and all that kind of stuff? Do you think
Independence Day?
Mm-hmm. Do you think? Well, no, because Independence Day must be a riff on Star Fox, right?
Why?
Because when did Independence Day come out?
94?
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Interesting. Do you think R-Wing is a riff on there's X-Wing, there's
totally,
Y-Wing, there's B-Wing, and they're well, let's just here's a letter that hasn't been used yet.
Yeah, no, I think it is absolutely, and it's not even like the letter R; it's ARWING.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, it's the thing that like the R Wing is the only vehicle that you pilot in the original Star Fox, and in the second one they sort of open it up so that you can do the Landmaster or the submarine whose name I forget. But like when you're in those other vehicles, you just want to get back in the R Wing.
That's always been the problem with these later games too.
Or
is
like
you're just like
there's a way to unlock on foot combat, which makes no sense. You're a Star Fox. You want to be up in the air, zipping around. Mark, that's a great A. Are you ready to move on to your B?
Yeah, okay. So my B is for biosensor.
What are you talking about?
So
was there a biosensor for the Nintendo 64?
In Japan.
Okay.
And it's really similar to the Wii Vitality sensor.
Which never actually came out.
So the biosensor, you plug it into the controller pack slot on the back of the controller, like where the Rumble Pack would go.
Well, all of these things we'll be talking about soon.
And you clip it to your ear. And it's
your ear?
Yeah, you clip it to your ear and it measures your heart rate. And it was released only in Japan, and it's compatible only with Tetris 64, which slows down or speeds up depending on how fast your heart is beating.
Well, so as you panic, does it slow down, or as you panic, does it speed up?
I don't know. That's a good question. That's actually really funny.
Like, is it trying to facilitate your playing, or is it like leaning into like as it makes you panic? It's like,
like going to a haunted house.
Yeah.
I hope it's that second one.
Me too, kind of.
Because then you can also just use it to train yourself to be zen, right? It's like, okay, this is really chaotic, but I have to keep it together, or it's just going to get more chaotic.
Right. It's like Tetris Effect, right? Like Tetris Effect does such a good job of like hypnotizing you using the Tetris speed, and sometimes it'll slow down because it's like it knows that you've been like jamming for a while and that like you need to relax, and then it just gives it to you. It would be cool if it knew you needed to relax because of the thing in your ear, and then like as soon as you started to calm down again, it was like now you gotta go.
Yeah. So I thought this was so cool, and I thought it was so funny, the
biosensor,
the kind of similarities with the Wii Vitality sensor, which obviously never ended up happening. But yeah, it was manufactured by SETA, so it wasn't like a official Nintendo release, but it worked with Tetris 64.
I do think it is. We will mention, I think, a number of peripherals that are only like usable on like one or two games. A really weird time for peripherals and Nintendo systems.
But there were a lot of peripherals.
There were a lot of weird little ones. Yeah. But like, for me, when I think about the hardware associated with the Nintendo 64, I just think about like a bunch of different color controllers, all of which we'll get to in a bit. Mark, my B is the Bowser fights in Super Mario 64, because they're iconic, right? Like you hear that music, that and you know exactly what's about to happen, right? You're on this platform like floating above a sea of lava, and you're gonna run around behind Bowser and grab his tail. And the thing that's so cool about this to me, and about the Bowser fights in general, is that sort of for the first time, a Mario game is making you engage with like the core concepts of the game in order to beat Bowser. So instead of like just getting past him in the original Mario, or like kind of baiting him onto specific parts of the bridge to break in Super Mario Brothers 3, it's your mastery of 3D space. Like you have to be able to run around in circles faster than he can spin, right? Like your precision there is being tested, which is something that the entire game is about, right? Is your demanding your ability to navigate three-dimensional space. So sort of goes hand in hand with the analog thumbstick, that like this is a thing that was impossible before, and Mario 64 and the Nintendo 64 makes that Bowser fight possible.
Oh, that's really cool.
You like those Bowser fights, Mark?
I don't actually. I don't particularly like the Bowser fights in Mario 64. But remember, I most recently played Mario 64
right
as part of the Super Mario 3D All-Stars that released a couple of years ago, celebrating Mario's 35th anniversary. And I had a really hard time with Mario 64 in general. So that's kind of coloring, just because like the camera and all that kind of stuff. So Yeah, not my favorite Bowser fights for sure.
Well, let's move on to my C, which is the C buttons, of course. Mark, is this your C as well?
It is not.
Okay, good. As I was picking it, I was like, this one feels obvious. Maybe I shouldn't do it. But the C buttons, man, what a weird feature on this controller that there are 4 different buttons that are all labeled C, and seemingly only really like they control the camera, right, in Super Mario 64, and then everyone else just has to like figure out what to do with those C buttons. And you think about how like Ocarina of Time uses them as like item selection buttons, or like Star Fox 64, you like hold a button and then push it, or a direction and push one of them, right? Or you boost and do it. However, you push push these buttons. It's like it's a mobility thing. That's how you do like the somersaults or the U-turns or whatever. It's such an odd collection of buttons that like sort of makes up another D-pad, but like no one really uses it as a right D-pad. It's just a bizarre thing that like they abandon after this.
Right. Yeah.
Or it becomes the right thumbstick on the GameCube controller.
Right, which makes more sense. But yeah, the way that it's presented on the Nintendo 64 controller, you're going from the Super Nintendo where you have those like 4 face buttons.
Yes.
Which, and again, like looking back on it, don't always make a ton of sense either, because there's a lot of games where they have like duplicative, like behavior and things like that. But you have like the A and B button, which are really big and prominent.
Right.
And then these 4 cluster that you're right. Like there was never really any consensus on what to use it for.
Right. And like the C sort of implies camera, which is what it does in Super Mario 64. But then like no one else, like I guess from time to time, you can sort of assume that if you're in a 3D space, you can manipulate the camera with, one of those buttons. But like frequently, no.
Right. I mean, Zelda, no.
Zelda, no.
Yeah. My C, I actually have 2. So one, I don't want to dwell on too long, and that's so when I was looking at the analog stick and trying, looking at like user manuals to see what it was actually called. And the official name for it is the control stick, which is not that interesting. But the part that I found interesting that I did not know before is that the analog stick or control stick on a Nintendo 64 controller is not actually analog. It's digital.
Okay.
So it kind of works like a ball mouse or like a trackball and I do not fully understand this, but like the position is tracked using LEDs and like little holes around the edge of the wheel, so that way like when you're moving the stick around and where it is the light is blocked is how it knows where like
so it's
the position of the stick.
Oh, interesting. So it's not actually it like with other like joysticks or analog sticks that there's like a gate that it is like pushing up against and it knows how hard you're pushing.
That is not the case with the Nintendo 64 controller. So what I for my entire life have called an analog stick is digital. It is not in fact an analog stick. It is a control stick, but it it's functionally equivalent to a true analog stick. Control stick.
Pushing it aside.
My other one.
This is like finding out that there are no Nintendo cartridges.
No, I completely agree.
This is heartbreaking.
Collectathon.
Okay, let's talk Donkey Kong 64 now.
Yeah, and Banjo-Kazooie, like you name it, Nintendo 64
mostly Rare
has got a collectathon for it. And it's so by collectathon, it's kind of a term I feel like that's thrown around quite a bit nowadays, but basically means, there were these platformers, and you're right, a lot developed by Rare, where they had this 3D space, and so you don't necessarily have a lot of the precision format platforming that you had of 2D platformers, like, even like Donkey Kong Country that Rare had worked on previously. And so what is the gameplay mechanic in this 3D space?
Right.
And what Rare really dug into is this idea of like what we now kind of like derisively referred to as like collectathons, where you're going through these 3D environments with the goal of collecting everything of like something, bananas or coins or whatever it is.
Jiggies, Jinjos. Yeah, I mean, what's so interesting about like these sort of collectathon as a concept is like the first rare one of these is Banjo-Kazooie, and Banjo-Kazooie, the original, especially as you compare it to the games that came out later, is so much like Mario 64, right? Like that Nintendo had laid the blueprint for this, and they capped themselves at there are 8 red coins and 6 stars, and I guess if you get 100 coins, you can also get like a 7th star. But that's it, right? Like a total of when like I guess you start adding that up, and that's like okay, 8 coins, 8 red coins, 100 regular coins, 7 stars. That's kind of a lot of stuff to collect. But Rare went nuts with this concept.
And it was, as a kid, it was really hard for me because I remember getting Donkey Kong 64, I think like for Christmas or something. And, being so primed by Donkey Kong Country, a game that I loved, to kind of like expect that's what a Donkey Kong game would be.
Sure.
That I, like Donkey Kong 64, I have never beat because I did not understand it. Like I genuinely, maybe I was too young, or I just wasn't familiar with the type of game that it wanted to be, that it was like I didn't get it. I was like, why can't I go? Why can't I like platform? Like why can't I do stuff?
Yeah, well, it's because it makes you it wants you to like retread the same territory 5 times so you can collect 5 different colors of bananas as 5 different Kongs. But yeah, it's a shame how like there could be a very good game in Donkey Kong 64 if they just like restrained what they were doing, because like the core mechanics are fun, but yeah, it's just they make you pick up too much stuff.
Should we move on to D?
Yeah, it's your D first.
My D is another rare game of sorts, Dinosaur Planet.
Okay, all right.
So this is a game that Rare was working on originally for the Nintendo 64, and it eventually turned into Star Fox Adventures on the GameCube, but initially was just a completely different game, based around, like, I guess Crystal, the character who ended up in Star Fox Adventures, was part of it, but there was, instead of Fox McCloud, you played as another, like, furry character. And
yeah, I mean, it is hard to escape. Like, there's something about the design of the Star Fox characters that don't read as furry to me until Crystal shows up. And then it's like, oh, I guess this is all like furry stuff, huh?
But basically, Rare was working on this game completely independent from Star Fox, and Nintendo saw it, and Miyamoto or somebody was
Miyamoto.
like, oh, like Star Fox could fit in here. And so Rare began working on it with incorporating like Star Fox characters and specifics and things like that. And again, it eventually moved to development on the GameCube, but originally started on the Nintendo 64. And kind of like an interesting footnote to this is that in 2021, I think like towards the end of the year, a Nintendo 64 build from the year 2000 leaked, and it had Fox McCloud in the game. So it had.
Oh, interesting.
So it had started, like Fox had like a sword, because it was still a hybrid, really,
right,
of like Dinosaur Planet, beginning to put Star Fox specifics into it, but it hadn't quite yet made the leap to GameCube. And Star Fox Adventure ended up being the last game that Rare would publish, like as like a Nintendo second party, because
yeah, that's right.
They were acquired by Microsoft shortly afterwards.
Now we have a well-documented history here of Nintendo releasing long abandoned Star Fox sequels on like Classic Edition consoles or Nintendo 64 online libraries, in that we've seen Star Fox 2 get published on those things. Do you think there's ever a chance that we see Dinosaur Planet on the Nintendo 64, Nintendo Switch Online?
That would be crazy.
That would be crazy.
And I'll never say never, but because it was eventually released as like something else, whereas like Star Fox 2 was just ingloriously canned.
Yeah, so probably not, is what you're saying. Dinosaur Planet, pretty good D. My D, also a Rare game. Diddy Kong Racing, of course. Mark, I'm a big fan of Diddy Kong Racing. I believe it to be the superior kart racer on that machine. It's just, it features like an open world, sort of like hub world between the races. It's got interesting like boss fights that you have to do in the racing track. You can race as a kart, a a hovercraft or an airplane on basically every track. It's remarkable stuff. And also, so this game comes out in 1997 and features both Banjo and Conker, who are stars of rare games that wouldn't come out until on Nintendo 64 until 1998 in Banjo's case and 2001 in Conker's case.
Wow.
So this is Conker's first appearance by 4 years. He's also in that Game Boy Color game that comes out in 1999. But whatever, ignore that. That's not on the Nintendo 64. It's got those two characters. It's got Diddy Kong, and it's got just like a whole host of like brand new weird little characters. I believe we ranked them all as part of our ranking rare characters, right?
I think we did. Yeah.
Back in the day. Tip Tup, he's a turtle. There's a little yellow mouse whose name I can't remember. But it's got such a strong, fun, funny, weird roster. And the racing is just solid.
Did you pick up the DS remake when
I did? It's not that good.
Oh yeah. What changed?
So the big problem with it is that you know how at the beginning of a Mario Kart race there's that like do 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 do, and you have to like push the accelerator at the right time to catch a boost. To catch a boost in the DS Diddy Kong Racing, there was like a little mini game at the front of the race that
used like the touch screen.
They used either the touch screen or like the microphone that you were like blowing into.
Yeah.
And it's like, dude, I'm not using that thing for anything else in this game. Like, especially there's one of them where you have to like spin the propeller, and you have to do it with the stylus or like it doesn't like take it. And so you're like doing this with the stylus, and then you just got to like throw the stylus so you can start racing. Like there's no second there where you get to like put it away and grab the thing the right way. Yeah, it's a real mess.
That's really funny.
And also, both Banjo and Conker are missing from the lineup.
Oh, that makes sense.
So that's a real bummer. With GoldenEye and Banjo Kazooie coming out on the Nintendo Switch Online, Nintendo 64, that makes me hopeful that like that relationship has been however much repaired that we'll get Diddy Kong Racing.
That would be amazing if we got, because still no word of Donkey Kong 64.
Yeah,
and so. Yeah, I believe if GoldenEye can happen, Diddy Kong Racing can happen.
I mean, if GoldenEye can happen, anything can happen, right? Like that's the one where I'm like, wow, how in the world? All right, Mark, my E is for the expansion pack. The expansion pack was a little red thing that you jammed into the front of your Nintendo 64 that doubled its RAM to 8 megabytes, which, just for reference, the Switch has 4 gigabytes of RAM.
Megabytes?
No.
Yeah.
The Switch?
Oh, the Switch.
The Switch. That was just for scale. Yeah. So normally the Nintendo 64 has 4 megabytes of RAM. This doubled it to 8. It came bundled with the Donkey Kong 64 and was required to play Donkey Kong 64, The Legend of Zelda: Majora's Mask, and most of Perfect Dark. You could turn on Perfect Dark and like access some parts of the game, but like most of it you couldn't. But that's it. Those were the only 3 games that required it. The expansion pack did, however, increase or improve the performance of a number of different games. But like weirdly enough, not a lot of first-party games. And I don't know if that's just because Nintendo had already like moved on from developing games for the console at this point, or if they were always like Nintendo's just always better about like coloring inside the lines that they set for themselves at the beginning of the generation. The only, to my research, the only Nintendo published game that had a performance boost from the expansion pack outside of the 3 that I already mentioned, that for which it's essentially required, is Excitebike 64. And all the rest are like third-party games that were clearly people being like, Nintendo, we need more power. We've been developing for this dinosaur for so long. We need more RAM. And they're like, okay, fine, you can use the expansion pack. But just like, what a weird little thing that they weren't taking advantage of.
Yeah, that is crazy.
It's also nuts now to think about. So, okay, the Nintendo 64 Switch Online app has Majora's Mask on it, right? So that's a game that requires the expansion pack. Does that mean when Excitebike 64 comes out that we're going to get the improved performance that would have come with that expansion pack?
Oh, interesting.
Like, will we have the resolution that came with that little bit of extra RAM?
Yeah. I don't know.
I don't know either. Mark, what's your E?
My E is for Empire, as in Shadows of the Empire.
Shadows of.
For a little Star Wars nerd like myself, this, like, Shadows of the Empire was a seismic event because it was not just a video game.
Mm-mm.
It was not just a novel. There was like a CD that was associated with, like, this was a multimedia extravaganza of new Star Wars content with a story that was set between Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. It was such an exciting time, and I remember when Shadows of the Empire came out, and there's like the first level, the second level is like the battle on Hoth, and you're able to like fly around.
So is that after the train or before the train?
I can't
I
remember.
know there's a train.
But like that was such an exciting, cool, like mind-blowing moment. Is Shadows of the Empire a great game, a great story, a great,
Yes.
like
I mean, I read that book. Collected
totally.
those action figures.
Prince Zizor.
Prince Zizor and like Chewbacca and like a costume. Obviously, Dash Rendar.
Yeah, it was a really exciting time. Also, the special editions was 1 year away. I didn't realize. I was looking this up because I was trying to remember. So Star Wars is obviously in a very different place than it was back then, but it's interesting to think about that, at the time it had been, a little around 10 years since the last like big Star Wars movie. Yeah, there were the books, but that was for a very specific audience. Like, Star Wars was not in the mainstream like it is today.
Right.
And so Lucasfilm was kind of like, they were revving up the engines for that special edition and for the prequels that would be just a couple of years later. I was trying to figure out, like, when were the prequels announced? And
oh boy, yeah, what a great question.
so apparently his intention to make it was like announced in Variety in like 1993. But I'm pretty sure as a kid I had no idea that like the prequels were coming until later than that. But
Well, so the versions of the original trilogy that we had on VHS that I watched like over and over again are the ones that start with the Leonard Maltin interview with George Lucas. And at that point, like, Maltin is asking him about episodes 1, 2, and 3. And Lucas is like evasive about it. I guess these things probably would have come out in like 92 or 93, something like that. But like, yeah, I don't remember him being like, yep, and when those movies come out, they'll be this. So much as like he like claimed at that point to like know the story of episodes 1, 2, and 3, which I don't think he did during the filming of those movies. But yeah, it is interesting to think, like, was he looking at the decade later landscape of Star Wars-lessness and just being like, oh, we got to like build some hype back up before I can put the Phantom Menace out, which would be then this publishing initiative through Shadows of the Empire, the special editions of the original trilogy, and then eventually in 1999, Phantom Menace.
yeah. But even as a kid, Shadows of the Empire felt like an event. Like, I was all in.
Yeah. Well, and it's like, even kind of now, that's like unparalleled, right? Like, we've had so many High Republic books, right? And comics and stuff. But I say and stuff, and that's really it. It's just books and comics. There is no action figure line. There's no video game. I guess there will be that Star Wars Eclipse, if that ever comes out. But like, yeah, at the moment, it's not all like popping off on all these different platforms like it was for just this one moment for Shadows of the Empire.
Yep.
Why was that a Nintendo 64 exclusive?
Yeah, I don't know. And interestingly, it was published by Nintendo, but
Yeah.
Lucasfilm published Nintendo 64 games,
Right.
like,
Quite a few.
as well. But this one specifically published by Nintendo.
Mark, your F.
My F is for Fire Orange, which is the color of this like opaque Nintendo 64 that you could buy, the system itself and the controller were this fire orange color. We had a fire orange
You did.
but the controller, not the
okay.
system itself, so you must have been able to buy them separately as well.
Well, I think also like on the secondary market, like it was all bets were off. Like these things got
sure.
separated all the time. Yeah.
But it was such a boom time for these like see-through consoles.
Yes.
And it is something that and even a few years later, the original Game Boy Advance was kind of like opaque like this with like a purplish shell.
I've got that one.
But bring it back.
Yeah, bring it back.
Like,
where did it go?
If you did that same sort of treatment to a Nintendo Switch, I would buy that in a second.
Oh, I mean, I've seen lots of like modded Joy-Cons to have that like see-through purple color. Yeah, it's sort of wild that that's not been tapped as like a nostalgia thing.
Totally, because that's what like remember the Game Boy SP? There was like the NES special edition that kind of like looked like an NES, but we have not had that for a long time, and it feels like you could totally do a Nintendo 64 Fire Orange Switch. I just want to show you the picture, because
please.
It is radical.
Oh yeah, that is bold. Mark, you got to post that in the Discord. And then if you're not in the Discord, you should send us an email or a tweet. Make sure you get in the Discord so you can see the picture of the Fire Orange Nintendo 64 that Mark just shared with me. Mark, my F is 4-player standard. This is another bold innovation of the Nintendo 64. No one had 4 controller ports on the front of their system. Everyone had 2. Because that's what we thought multiplayer games was you versus me or you and me together. That's it. Those are the only options. And the 4 controller ports on the front of the system made it so that like you think of the number of games that had 4-player split screen. Obviously, GoldenEye is a huge example. Mario Kart, Star Fox,
Perfect Dark,
Donkey Kong 64. So many of these games. Smash Brothers, yes. And it's all because you could just do 4-player and not think about it. Like it just happened because all those things were there. And one of the things that I thought was a nice little like innovation here was that the system launched with 4 different color controllers. 6 different colors of controller, so that you knew, and like the plug that plugged into the thing was the color of the controller. So like there were so many controllers and so many people playing that like you still knew, you could look visually, you had this cue of like, oh, the gray one is player 1, the green one is player 2, the blue one is player 3. And it was just like a very like nice, easy way to do this. Like they made it something that was impossible before, possible and like logistically clear at the same time.
Yeah, man, it was being able to play with 4 people in split screen was so cool. We had a mix of Nintendo first party controllers, third party controllers, but I just remember under the like TV there was a basket that all these controllers just got thrown in, and the cords were it was like a Rat King. They all so got tangled together.
I mean, with the Nintendo 64 controller, I always did the like the cross your heart
and you totally could because of the trident prongs.
The trident prongs. Anyway, yeah, I just thought that was a genius little feature of the Nintendo 64. Mark, my G. I actually had kind of a tough time with this one, but I went with Gruntilda, the villain from Banjo-Kazooie, this grotesque witch who steals Tootie, who's Banjo's little sister, so she can pop her in a machine and steal her beauty, which happens every time there's a game over. There's like a little cutscene where like you watch this whole thing play out. And it isn't fun. Turns Tootie into a bit of an ogre, and Grunty into a babe. And yeah, that's it. Just Grunty. Well, it's a character that they work so hard to build details for, because you meet her sister, who's like trapped in the walls of the castle, and she tells you things about Gruntilda. It's all like gross out specifics, right? Like feels like an episode of Ren and Stimpy every time she talks to you. And by the end of the game, you are in a like game show style thing, and some of the things that you land on are you being quizzed about the gross facts about Gruntilda. So there's just like no escaping her in that game.
That's a really good one. I feel like, Banjo-Kazooie holds, especially the first ones, hold such an interesting place in the Nintendo 64 library, because you got one Mario with the Nintendo 64, and it came at launch.
Yeah.
And Banjo-Kazooie did a really good job, especially I feel like the first one, of kind of filling that gap, you know, like another high quality 3D platformer that if you couldn't get enough, you wanted another Mario but it didn't exist, Banjo-Kazooie was a fairly good stand-in for that.
Yeah, absolutely.
My G is Game Pack, and that's PAK.
You know it's PAK. And, by the way, Expansion Pack was also PAK.
And so what was the Biosensor, not PAK. But the Game Pack, like Patrick and I discovered when we did our ranking of like Nintendo cartridges, very few
don't exist.
Yeah, like none of Nintendo's
there are packs and there are carts.
Yep, but nothing is called
discs.
a cartridge.
That's right.
So Nintendo 64's version was a game pack, and especially notable for the Nintendo 64 because it is a very controversial decision, and one that arguably, was a real sliding doors moment for Nintendo.
Yep.
PlayStation had the CD-ROM, which was cheaper to develop for, or cheaper to publish, cheaper to make, was able to hold more. You could
also everyone and their mother sold CDs. Nintendo was as a developer or publisher, you had to buy the packs to print your game on, and they were expensive, and you had to buy them from Nintendo.
And very limited memory. So it was one of those moments where Nintendo kind of
made a mistake. Yeah.
And a fateful choice for the Nintendo 64. And yeah, sure, there are benefits, just like we see with the game carts on the Nintendo Switch. It's much faster to load games than it was CD-ROMs. You could, not a ton of games did, but you could theoretically save, do game saves directly to a game pack.
Right. Actually, I feel like that became Nintendo 64 standard, that you were saving right on the game pack itself and not on, because it did have memory cards that like went into that little slot in the back of the controller, but I feel like I only really remember using that for a handful of games, that mostly you were saving right on the game pack.
Yeah, so there were definitely like some benefits, but in the long run, not. It was more a bid by Nintendo to try to maintain the control, that like tight grip that they had since the NES and SNES era, and it just really backfired on them.
One thing that it did allow, speaking of Banjo-Kazooie, is for the way that Banjo-Kazooie uses music, so that instead of like loading up a full music track, it was able to, the way Banjo-Kazooie works is it's really just playing that Teddy Bear's Picnic theme all the time when you're walking around the castle. But depending on where you are, it's different instrumentation, and that all happens in real time. So it doesn't have to stop playing a track and like load up a new one, which is what you'd have to do if it was on a CD-ROM. They're all sort of running at the same time, and it just like slider up, slider down, which is something that a cartridge allows that a CD would not have.
That's really cool. I didn't
know
that.
Cool?
Up next is H.
And
my H is for Hyrule Field. The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time.
Mark, it felt so big.
Yeah, what a moment when, you are first allowed out into the world and you see Hyrule Field.
Yes.
And its vast expanse and the beautiful music. It's teased on the attract screen, at the beginning of the game. But
it's dark, so you don't really get a sense of all of it.
You don't really understand the scope of it. Being able to freely ride Epona through it, the way that it changes from day to night, and at night it becomes a little bit dangerous.
Yeah.
It was such like a revelation, such a memorable part of experiencing that game.
It's that's such a good demonstration of the sort of like architectural philosophy of which is prominent in a lot of like Frank Lloyd Wright stuff of like compression, like in physical space, compression and release, that like all of Kokiri Forest and like the Deku Tree and like all that stuff that you go through in the first like hour or two of that game is all like tight corridors. Everything is small, it's compressed, and then as soon as you hit that Hyrule field, that's the release, and suddenly a space which ultimately isn't that big, like you can make Link run across it in like 2 minutes, right? But it feels at that point enormous.
Yeah, Disneyland does a very similar thing. Like,
Yes.
you go into Disneyland, there's the train station, but then you have to walk through the tunnel where your view is kind of like hidden.
Yep.
And then when you walk through, then it opens up and you see the castle and everything. But it really is, it is such a wonderful example of that moment. And, the previous Zelda games, the original Legend of Zelda, Zelda 2, The Adventure of Link, and Link to the Past, they had this like vast expanse from the beginning, and that was part of like the
Right,
appeal, but to
right.
experience it in 3D space was a totally different, like,
Yeah,
mind-blowing moment.
it's a game changer for sure. All right, Mark, my H is Happy Together. Do you remember this commercial for the for Super Smash Brothers
Yes,
on the Nintendo
I
64?
do.
I'm just gonna play a little bit of it. So we're seeing Donkey Kong and Mario and Yoshi, and they're all together until Mario trips Yoshi, and then they all start fighting.
In the happy-go-lucky world of Nintendo. Introducing Super Smash Brothers, where all your favorite characters go toe-to-toe in one 4-player star-studded.
So that's just featuring the Turtle song "Happy Together," which I look, that song gets used in a lot of stuff, but I think that's a perfect deployment. Is like, introduce me to the idea of Super Smash Brothers.
Such a good commercial.
It's such a funny commercial because they're all just like mascots. They're like dudes in costumes. And yeah, it's just, I don't know. It's cute and it makes me laugh. All right, Mark, I've got 2 eyes, but so would you mind going first on this?
No, I'm happy to. So my eye is injuries.
Okay.
Specifically caused
The
by
palm
the
of your hand?
tug of war minigame
Mhm.
in Mario Party 64. And there's more to this that, like, like I knew. So basically, in the game, there are characters that are over like a cliff. They're each on separate sides of the cliff, and you're trying to pull, and the way that you do that is by rotating the control stick. And I
as
think
fast as you can.
And I think theoretically you're supposed to do it with your thumb, but obviously it was much faster to like do it with your the palm, and so you could just like really whip it around.
Yeah, I mean that is also one of those like kid logic things, like using the power pad with your fists. That like I don't actually know if it was faster.
Yeah, I don't know either.
I don't know.
But it made national news, and not only that, I did not realize this. So, I like the New York Attorney's General Office officially complained to Nintendo about the game because they were getting so many complaints. So this is from a CNET story, as quoted in a Kotaku story. So one kid got a tetanus shot, said Christy Pritchard, a spokeswoman for New York Attorney General Elliot Spitzer. The alarming thing was how little time some of these children spent playing the game before they were injured, Pritchard said. One parent said their child had been playing the game for 15 to 20 minutes when they got a second-degree burn. Maybe Nintendo should ship only to colder climates, quipped Richard Doherty, president of Envisioneering Group.
What?
Yeah. So
That's a terrible statement about that.
So in response,
What? I don't understand the tetanus shot thing.
yeah, I guess
Because
yeah,
like you could like break the skin, but like it's not rusty.
yeah, I don't know.
What are we talking about?
Apparently, according to some complaints that were filed, children had suffered cuts, punctures, blistered, and friction burns on their hand. In response, Nintendo, I did not know this, but this is hilarious.
They released the glove.
Yes, 4 pairs of protective sports gloves.
Yeah.
They sent them to anyone in the United States who had bought the game, could provide proof of purchase, and wanted them. They were like fingerless gloves that had padded palms.
Do you know if they're branded in any way?
I don't.
If anyone has one of these things, let us know. I would love to email us, Nintendo Cartridge Society at gmail.com. I would love to see I'd love to see one of these things.
But there was like a special recorded message just for the Mario Party tips hotline, which urged people to avoid injuries by manipulating the joystick with their thumb and forefinger rather than the palm. So yeah, I didn't know that they sent gloves. I didn't know that there were all these complaints. I just knew of it from its notoriety, not the other part of it.
Not the fallout. You didn't know the fallout of
Didn't know the fallout.
Mark, I'm going to go with this, which I don't actually know that much about other than just to acknowledge that it is a strange piece of technology, the IQUE. It is a Chinese exclusive sort of console in a controller that, it looks like, it almost looks more like a Dreamcast controller than anything else. And it had games either uploaded to it via like a memory card, or you could upload games from like a kiosk, and it was just all Nintendo 64 stuff. And it was available in China, and what the shop only shut down a couple years ago. But yeah, for a long time it was like the only game in town in China.
Yeah, because Nintendo recently started partnership with Tencent to officially sell Nintendo,
Switch.
The Nintendo Switch there. But before, I just looked it up. This IQ company was a joint venture between Wei-Yan and Nintendo.
Yeah, a weird little piece of history and hardware. Okay, Mark, my J. It's got to be James Bond, and we don't have to talk about James Bond too much, as we talked about James Bond a ton just a couple weeks ago. Go check out that episode if you missed it. But I mean, just think about the outsized role that GoldenEye 007 had at sleepovers and among people who played video games. And it's notable for all these reasons, and being a first-person shooter on a home console, having the multiplayer built into it, the split screen, all of that. But I am convinced that that's the sole reason that anyone who was a teenager in the 90s cared about James Bond at all. Right? That's why I saw the Brosnan movies in the theaters, because I didn't care about James Bond before, because the franchise has been sort of dormant for a little while. And I hadn't seen GoldenEye until after I played the game and after I started to see all these other movies. It's just such a weird confluence of events that tied Nintendo and James Bond to each other. And it was so great for both the Bond franchise and for Nintendo as a whole.
Patrick, my J is for justice. And what are two elements of justice? Why is it sin and punishment?
I don't. Geez.
Let's not dwell on it too much.
Is sin part of justice?
Developed by Treasure.
Yeah.
Released in 2000 only in Japan. Sin and Punishment is a rail shooter that has a really unique control scheme. So you use both the D-pad and the control stick at the same time so that way you can simultaneously control the player character and the reticule on screen.
Mm-hmm.
I hadn't heard about it until it came to the Wii Virtual Console in 2007, which happens to be the same year the game's story takes place, when war breaks out as the world struggles with famine. And a sequel released for the Wii in 2009, but now I feel like Sin and Punishment is considered one of the best Nintendo 64 games, and never released in the US.
Oh, I mean, other than it is on the Nintendo Switch, Nintendo 64 Online.
Right. I mean, in its original release.
I see. Is that a game we should play? Should we make? Because I know I turned it on and did the training part of it and was like, oh, this is a 26-year-old game. I get it. But is that something that we should actually try to do?
Yeah, I wonder if we. I
like rail shooters,
because I remember I bought it when when it released on the Wii Virtual Console. But the way I played it was with the Wii Pro controller, which I feel like is
probably not
an ideal way. I think it actually was best designed for a Nintendo 64 controller.
Yeah.
So I now that those have been re-released for the Switch, it'd be interesting to try to play it that way.
Yep. Interesting, and I would like us to go back and explore that. And we'll allow that as your J for justice. Do you want? I mean, I've screwed up the order now.
Oh,
Do
sure.
you wanna
I'll
give your
I'll do K. Yeah. So my K is for Kongs. The Donkey.
so many Kongs.
So many Kongs. Donkey Kong 64. A real cornucopia of Kongs that have quietly been retired. I would say we don't see much from a lot of these
Yeah.
Kongs anymore. So in Donkey Kong 64. The playable Kongs were Donkey Kong, of
Mhm.
course, with his like
Coconut gun.
coconut gun.
Fires and spurts.
Diddy Kong.
Mm-hmm.
But then they were like, no Dixie, no Kitty. We got ourselves a Lanky,
Mm-hmm.
a Tiny, and a Chunky.
Yeah. Lanky's a good Kong.
Lanky's a good Kong.
It's a shame that they like retired him.
I know. See, and Tiny and Chunky, I don't have such fond, like
I mean,
memories.
they're kind
for.
of just bad Dixie and bad Kitty, right?
Which is, I think, I
Why
guess.
didn't they just use those characters?
I don't
again?
know. I genuinely don't know. But yeah, Lanky, I think justice for Lanky. It's time for
That's
him
right.
to return. And hopefully if this even, with when Tropical Freeze came out, they were like, yes, we Funky, you're back.
Yeah, you're back, Funky.
You've made it. You can be playable in the Switch version.
As the 5th playable Kong in the game, which already has Cranky. That he's a new addition.
But nobody out there was like, well, maybe we should bring Chunky back. Maybe we should bring Lanky back.
But we should bring Lanky back. And here's the thing. Here's the thing. All of the Kongs had their own musical instruments that they played in that game. They should, and Lanky Kong, do you know what instrument he played?
No, what did Lanky play?
He played the trombone. And what's
Oh,
a
of
big
course
hit
he
game
did.
on the Steam shop right now is Trombone Champ. They should bring that over to Switch, but with Lanky Kong in the character role.
Man, Lanky with those big arms, long arms, he could have
Yeah.
played like a
coulda.
superside trombone.
He definitely could have. Supersized trombone. Mark, for my K, I went with Killer Instinct Gold, which is sort of a weird, not quite Killer Instinct 2, but like is sort of Killer Instinct 2. The graphics aren't as like, the resolution isn't as good, and like the fidelity of the models isn't as great as Killer Instinct 2 in the arcade, but it has a more dynamic camera, so like it really plays into the sort of like 3D or like seeming 3D about the stages. But Killer Instinct was just one of those games that like it was finding another like way into the sort of like Mortal Kombat thing of like, here's how we make the characters visually distinct as we're digitizing like photographs of humans. This was pre-rendered stuff a la Donkey Kong Country, and then like that digitized as like giant sprites on the screen. So yeah, Killer Instinct Gold.
Another rare game.
Another Rare game. Rare shows up a lot on any discussion of the Nintendo 64. They put out so many games on that thing in not a long time. My L, we'll do my L. Lakitu. I had to go with the Lakitu because leave it to Nintendo to be introducing a 3D style of Mario gameplay, 3D platformer, unprecedented like thing where you have control over the camera. Leave it to Nintendo to say like, that camera has to be a character. That camera has to be a character that you're controlling. And so here's the Lakitu with a camera on a fishing line. And now, Mark, that's all well and good. I want to discuss what sort of magic gimbal this Lakitu has that the video camera on a fishing line is as steady as it is.
Oh yeah,
How
no.
does he accomplish this?
It's amazing. I also, maybe because he's in a cloud,
Mm.
like he's lighter than air and so has a lot of maneuverability that way.
I wonder if maybe there's like a little cloud under the camera.
Oh,
too,
yes,
like steadying
possibly.
it.
But I also like to think that, from this camera, it's being transmitted back to like a van somewhere.
Yeah, sure.
That a bunch of toads
Right,
are,
are, like, editing
are
together.
like directing the game. So there's like a little toad, that's be like,
Tight on
3, which would explain why the camera in Mario 64 is a little wonky.
Right. They never let you go to the Toad van to control the cut.
That's right. That's a very good one. My L is actually also Mario 64 related in a way,
What?
and it's Luigi.
Where's Luigi?
Where's Luigi? The big playground rumor coming out of Super Mario 64 is that Luigi was a secret playable character that you could unlock by doing a an assortment of activities. And while not true in the final release, there is a kernel of truth in it, in that just a few years ago, they found Luigi in the code of Mario 64. And part of that is because in the early development, they were toying around with the idea of making it a multiplayer game. It was something that Shigeru Miyamoto was really interested in, and didn't make the final cut. But what a crazy experience that would have been.
Yeah, well, and there's also, there's the plaque on the statue in the fountain in the back, where the ghosts are, in Mario 64 outside of Peach's castle, and the plaque appears to read "L is real 2401," which is of course what made everyone believe Luigi is real. He's in here, and no one, there was a online debate over what 2401
Yeah, just
meant.
a few more 100 years.
Yeah.
And then that statue will open up and Luigi will walk out of it.
Yeah, I wonder if people thought are there 2,401 stars?
Oh, sure.
Or something
yeah,
there?
or something
like that. How do you trigger this 2401 L is real? Yeah, he should have been in that game. That would have been fun.
Well, I'm going to close out this first part of our ABCs of Nintendo 64.
You're going to close out your part of this part.
That's right. With another Mario 64 thing, and that is my M is for Metal Mario.
Dun, 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 dun.
So, kind of standard that every Mario game, new platformer, introduces some new power up, and one of the ones that was introduced in Mario 64 was Metal Mario, which I think was a really cool new addition to the game, because it showed off a lot of what the Nintendo 64 could do.
Oh yeah, he's a reflective surface now.
He's a reflective surface, walking around. He, the momentum changes when you are Metal Mario. He is now shown up in maybe not other platformers so much as shows up in special costumes in various games.
Probably because it's easy to do it, right? Where you're just make all the colors silver. Done. No, that is a good one, Mark. I have two M's. But we've talked about Mario Party kind of a lot already with injuries. But I just want to mention Mario Party. It's the birth of a genre of game. They made 3 of them for the system. It's a perfect marriage of software and hardware. We talked about the 4 controller ports already. This is also the very beginning of Nintendo embracing the everyone can play sort of aesthetic. They perfected it with the Wii for sure, but I played Mario Party with a ton of my friends who didn't play video games because it's easy to pick up, easy to understand, and participate. And, Mario Party awards people stars for no reason. And that, can feel great for someone who's not able to keep up with the video gaminess of it. But the M that I really want to go with is, of course, Martinet. Charles Martinet, the voice of Mario. The first time we hear Mario, he's saying, "Hello," and it's Charles Martinet's voice, and it's how Nintendo's Super Mario 64 opens, and because it's a launch game, that's how the Nintendo 64 opens. That dude and his voice is synonymous with the Nintendo 64, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, that's such a good. That is so true. And he has become such an integral part of Nintendo. I feel like we should neither of us picked it, and maybe it'll come up later, but I feel like this is a good opportunity. Let's just for a second.
Yeah.
We should just talk about Mario 64. Because because I feel like it is such an important part of not just the Nintendo 64, but video games in general.
Yes.
It's the first really 3D platformer, and just we talked about Star Fox hitting the gaming world in such a big way, Mario 64 was seismic.
Yeah, I mean it changed. Yeah, I mean it changed what you could expect of video games, right? It really is. I think it's sort of the standard for the paradigm changing game where you're oh, this is what the platform is capable of, right? And there are so few of those just throughout time, that like, yeah, you absolutely have to acknowledge Super Mario 64 is a moment in video game history.
Yeah, and it also just marks an interesting point in Nintendo's history where Mario forks and Mario no longer becomes this easy, just like anybody can pick up and play type game. Like Mario 64 requires a certain like dexterity and a certain commitment to like mastering the systems, that a way that, you know, somebody could just easily pick up the original Super Mario Brothers and understand its concepts and like gameplay really quickly. And it was something that Nintendo had like a difficult time like
sort of correcting for in the
correcting
future.
for a long time until
new.
Basically.
All right, well, Mark, we have made it halfway through the alphabet, and we've been talking for an hour and 15 minutes, so we're going to call it here, and then we will finish up in next week's episode on this same topic. But Mark, in the meantime, let's close this out. All right, that is going to do it for this episode of Nintendo Cartridge Society. Remember, please rate, review, and follow us on Apple Podcasts. If you like the episode, you should share it on Facebook or Twitter, or wherever you share stuff. We appreciate it when you do that. You can follow us on Twitter. I'm at Patrick_Ellers. Mark is at MKE Mitchell, and the show is at Nin Cart Society. We also have a Facebook page, which is just Nintendo Cartridge Society. Anthony DeLuca made our logo. Our theme music is provided by 8-Bit Betty. You can get more of his music by going to 8bitbetty.com or by listening right now. For my co-host, Mark Mitchell, this is Patrick Eller saying thank you for listening.